This is the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Welcome back to the podcast here on Monday, October 21st, 2019. Thanks so much for tuning in. Today, Monday, first day after a football Sunday, but something a little bigger in my mind, something a little bit different is happening tomorrow, and that is the first day of the NBA season. So I have my three biggest questions, the three things that I'm thinking about most heading into this NBA season. Before I jump into that, I want to remind everyone that this podcast is available on all of your favorite platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube, and SoundCloud. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Took last week off because, yes, I was sick, but I'm back this week. Have some guests in the plans as well, so make sure to subscribe and rate the podcast on your favorite platform. All right, so as I look at this NBA season, it's looking to be a good one. I'm, covered this a lot on the podcast during this past summer, a crazy summer the league had. All the different moves, all the different trades, the people switching teams, obviously KD, Kyrie Irving now in Brooklyn. We have Kawhi Leonard, Paul George with the Clippers. The Lakers got Anthony Davis finally after the haul of picks and players that they gave up. Even teams like the Pelicans, who we thought last year, once they got rid of Anthony Davis, would be in rebuilding mode. They got the top pick. They got Zion. They signed a couple free agents. They look to be pretty good. So just a crazy offseason. And that's just in the Western Conference. Look over in the Eastern Conference. The 76ers are improved. How good will Giannis be? There's a lot of questions heading into this season. And for the first time in a long time, there is not a favorite going into this NBA season. And looking at that, looking at just the overall narrative for this season, it seems like this year the main theme will be we have a lot of questions and we need to get some answers for them in order to really see who's legit and who will be competing for a championship come June. Because right now, you looked through the Western Conference alone and you could list on your hand probably 5 to 6 teams who are playoff locks, and then another 5 teams are going to be fighting for a spot, and among those some championship contenders. Look over in the Eastern Conference, just a couple teams. So just a wide open year. And with that theme of having all of these questions about who's going to compete and who's going to be the best team and who's going to be there in the NBA Finals, I compiled my list of questions. I wrote down a lot of possibilities, but I narrowed it down to my 3 biggest questions I have coming into this season, because I think these are 3 questions where, a lot of people are thinking one of them pretty obvious, the other 2 maybe not so much. But all 3 of them I think are going to have a really big impact on the championship picture in this NBA season. So I'm going to start off with the Golden State Warriors, and more specifically Klay Thompson. If you remember correctly, last year in the NBA Finals, Klay Thompson suffered a torn ACL in Game 6, in the game that the Raptors were able to come out victorious and win the NBA championship. Klay Thompson went down with that torn ACL and has been rehabbing it ever since. Went through the whole, you look through the articles, went through this successful surgery, but now he's just on the road to recovery. And you look at the reports, and some reports are expecting him back around maybe end of March, even early April, people are saying. Maybe even earlier than that. There's kind of a mixed feeling as of right now. We're only a couple months separated from his ACL injury, so it's really tough to project out that far. But the question being, will Klay Thompson, how long will he be out? And how will that impact the Warriors? Because the Warriors have just got done a 5-year stretch that is arguably the greatest 5-year stretch in league history, or it has to be up there with them. You have to go back to basically whether it's the Jordan Bulls, but they only did, had 3 straight titles at a certain point. You have to go back maybe even to the Boston Celtics back with Bill Russell to see a comparative timeline for a team like this, going to 5 straight finals, winning several of them. It's been a long time, since 2014, really. The Golden State Warriors, 5 years now, have really just been in the spotlight, been the team in the NBA. And now it seems like they're finally not. They're finally going to be dethroned with Kevin Durant leaving, and now with Klay Thompson being injured. And my question basically becomes how will the Warriors approach this season? How will they come into this year, and what are their expectations? Because if they're coming into this season with the expectations to compete, I mean, they did sign D'Angelo Russell. They gave him a big contract during this offseason. So now you have Steph and D'Angelo Russell. That's a good backcourt. And I think one that can kind of work well off each other with the way that Russell can get to the basket, the way that Curry can space the floor. I think there's a scenario in an offense that those two guys really play well alongside each other. Where if you're the Warriors and you're saying, okay, we want to try to compete this year. We think we can go back, make it 6 straight made finals. That even though the rest of the West got good, and even though we lost KD, we still have this core that has had tons of success. Well, then you're looking at trying to rush Klay Thompson back, and maybe he gets back beginning of March. That would be the best case scenario. And how does he look? Is he able to come back in that amount of time? Are the Warriors going to try to compete, but Klay just won't be ready, and they'll just maybe rush him back just so they can be the 7th seed? It's a lot of questions right now surrounding the Warriors and really what their game plan is going into this season. I mean, personally, if I were Golden State, I would almost view this year as just almost a year off. That after this half a decade stretch of going to the finals every single year, you could use a break. You could use a year without going to the finals, without having that long of a stretch, without having that long going on. So with that in mind, I would say don't rush Klay Thompson back. That yes, you look at ACL injuries in sports, and you're going to point at Adrian Peterson, you're going to point at Julian Edelman, you're going to point at these guys in professional sports who have come back from ACLs. Well, the biggest difference there is football is way different than basketball in terms of an ACL. That with all the cutting and the quick movements you have to do on a court, your ACL has to be 100%. Has to be. That's why you see a lot of these guys who get these torn ACLs and they're out for a lot longer than you would expect, or they're just held out. I mean, Kristaps Porzingis hasn't played basketball really before this month. I think it was 19 months or something ridiculous like that. So you look at an ACL in basketball, it's just different than other sports. It just takes longer to heal. And not to mention, this is a Warriors medical staff that just a couple months ago, back in June, really came under heat with the way they dealt with Kevin Durant and rushing him back onto the floor just so he could tear his Achilles. So if I'm the Golden State Warriors, I don't see the value in best case scenario I think they could get would maybe be the 6th seed, probably more likely the 7th, would be to rush Klay Thompson back just so you could be the 7th seed and probably lose in the first round to either the Clippers or Lakers or Nuggets. I don't see, while Klay Thompson is not in game shape, barely recovered from the ACL, wearing a knee brace in a playoff game, I don't see the value in that. But I would also not be surprised if the Warriors say, look, we spent money this offseason. We still have Steph Curry in his, we don't know how many more years do we have Steph Curry in his prime. You have a superstar player like this. If we can rush Klay Thompson back and he can get back, and maybe he won't be 100%, but we could have him in a limited role, because Klay Thompson, second best shooter of all time in league history. If you basically look at the numbers, I mean, Steph Curry is probably number 1 and Klay Thompson second. So even if you have Klay Thompson on a limited role, you could kind of, play him a little off ball, have him catch and shoot some threes in limited minutes, 20 minutes a game or something. That's still valuable, especially in a playoff series. But it's all will come down to, what do the Warriors think? And what kind of season are they hoping to have? And I think that's going to be a real big question for that team. The next team I want to look at, the next question I have, is the Houston Rockets. And just the amount of questions circling around that franchise right now, I mean, especially after that whole Daryl Morey China incident. If you want to hear more what I think about that, I did a podcast about 2 weeks ago when the news was still kind of breaking around that, if you want to go back and check that out in the feed. But overall, just this organization, and I want to focus on just Russell Westbrook and James Harden together. Because these are two of the guys who I went back and looked at the highest usage rate seasons of all time. Three of the top 4 seasons for usage rate meaning how much this player is used, or how much they have the ball in their hands, how many of the offensive possessions they're taking shots, things like that. Basically, the higher the usage rate, the more involved you are in the offense. The 3 of the top 4 highest usage rates of all time in a single season are from Russell Westbrook and James Harden, that they combined for 3 of the top 4. Westbrook having 1 number one usage rate season in 2016-17, and the number 4 one in 2014-2015, and then James Harden's number of 40.47 last year was second most ever for a season. So these are two guys who love to have the ball in their hands and have had made a career out of being the go-to guys for their teams on a historic level. I mean, we're talking, we think of like players like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant as being the go-to guys, maybe even having that kind of ball hog tendency thrown around. Well, these guys the numbers show that these guys are even more so than those players were. So these are two guys who just have developed careers of being the guy. Two alpha males now, they have to share the backcourt. And whereas maybe you would point at Chris Paul and say that, look, that was able to kind of work out. Chris Paul's different because Chris Paul, as a point guard, yes, he needed the ball in his hands, but his game was more about, yes, creating for himself, but more about creating for his teammates. Russell Westbrook is known as he gets his. He cares about his triple-doubles. He averages triple-doubles. James Harden, he gets his. He puts up his stats. And while just the idea of having two of this decade's most consistent MVP candidates on the same team is a really appealing idea, the question is how the hell do these guys play together? How will that work out at all? Because there's the case for it and there's a case against it. I want to look at the case against it first because I think the case against it is really, really simple. Is that there's one ball and these guys have to coexist together. And that at the end of the day, the Houston Rockets are James Harden's franchise. That he is the superstar on this team. He is the face of this franchise. And that when there's 5 seconds left and they need a last shot, or there's 15 seconds left and it's the last possession, the ball will be in James Harden's hands. Whether it's a regular season game, postseason game, whatever, finals game, James Harden will have the ball. And the case against it is, I don't know how Russell Westbrook will deal with that. I don't know how long, if at all, he'll be able to put up with it. I mean, he's used to just running wild in OKC. And everybody says they love Russell Westbrook. They love playing with him. But I'm looking at it right now. KD left, and Paul George just forced his way out right after signing a long extension. So you can say you love playing with somebody. You can say that all you want. But when I see two great players, KD, a generational type player, and I think those two players fit alongside, theoretically, Russell Westbrook a lot better than James Harden does, and they both choose to leave him, that says a lot. That says a lot about how you are as a player and if people really, truly do like playing alongside you. So that's the case against it. And frankly, if you watch the Rockets game last season, look at his usage rate. 40% of the possessions felt like James Harden dribbling around outside while the rest of his team stood around for 20 seconds just to watch Harden throw up a fadeaway contested three-pointer. I don't see Russell Westbrook putting up with that for very long. So that's the case against it. It's fairly simple. It's fairly obvious. However, there's the case for it. And let me outline the case for it. The case would be that they stagger the minutes so that there's always one of these guys on the court at some point in the game. That's how you should deal with the stars in this league. That's what OKC kind of got wrong with Scott Brooks. So the case for it would be you stagger the minutes. That way, yes, they play together, but each guy also has a good chunk of minutes during the game where they are the guy on the court. They are the primary ball handler. Also, we've never seen Westbrook play off ball like this in the NBA. So while you can look at that and say, can he do that? I look at his skill set as arguably the most explosive player in the league right now and say, imagine him cutting to the basket, getting fed passes. How are you going to stop that? How are you going to defend that? That the first step Westbrook will have off ball, no defender will be able to keep up with that. And I think Harden will be able to pass him and feed him the ball that way if this offense is working out. So that's a case for it. Then we've never seen Westbrook really play in a system like D'Antoni's in a couple ways. One, most importantly, D'Antoni likes to space the floor out. And with this whole three-pointers and layups thing, obviously Westbrook is not going to be the one taking the three-pointers. But never in Oklahoma City did we see him have a team like this Rockets squad where they space the floor out and there is so much open room in the paint. I look at that and I look at Russell Westbrook and say, I think that's a huge opportunity for Westbrook. That's a lot of space for him to be driving to the basket, which is what he does best. So we've never seen him in a system like that. And also to D'Antonio's system, his credit, if there's any offense that is going to be able to produce enough shots for these two guys, it's D'Antoni's offense. It is D'Antoni's offense, hands down. That the amount of shot, just the sheer volume of this Rockets offense might be enough to keep both these guys happy. That I don't think there's any other offense that comes close. That his offense will be able to produce enough shots. So that's the case for it. And I mean, look at the Rockets. Russell Westbrook is way better than Chris Paul was recently. Chris Paul, awesome top 40 player in the league, but you're replacing a top 40 player with a top 10, top 5 guy. A guy who consistently is in the running for the MVP, along another guy who's consistently in the running for the MVP. And hey, they're friends, right? So whatever happened, there's such a range of possibilities. If you were to tell me that by Christmas Day we're talking about if these guys can last the season together, I would not be surprised. But if we're also talking Christmas Day, that they are far and away the best team in the NBA, I with that backcourt, I also would not be surprised. It could go sideways so quick, so many different directions. It's just going to be fun to watch. And then my last biggest question, is one that I don't think is being talked about a little bit, but really is an X factor in the NBA this season, and one that might be going a little bit under the radar. I hate when people say no one's talking about this, but no one's talking about this in a sense. And that's with Michael Porter Jr. and the Denver Nuggets. And how good can he be? Or the better question is, can he play basketball? Can he stay on the floor for any stretch of time, any consistent stretch of this season? Because the Denver Nuggets are really good, like really, really good. They're one of the best teams in the NBA. If you told me they were going to finish in first place at the end of the season, and in the standings, would not be surprised one bit. They have one of the best big men in the game, who is a legitimate MVP candidate, with a rising young point guard to feed him the ball. Add in the fact one of the best benches in the league and just one of the best supporting casts in the league. I mean, Gary Harris, Paul Millsap. This team is deep in addition to those kind of two young stars, including the one superstar they have. They also have postseason experience. So even though they're kind of young, even though they're kind of up and coming, last year they did make the playoffs, so they got that first kind of postseason series out of the way. The playoffs are just different. So they have a little bit of experience under their belt. Well, so they're already one of the top teams in the league. I just outlined that. But what if I told you that team is about to add a player who was in the same draft class as DeAndre Ayton, Luka Doncic, Trae Young, Marvin Bagley, and was at one point considered to be the best player in that draft class? A 6'10" forward that's incredibly athletic, can stretch the floor with a shot, and he would be playing next to the most offensively, technically gifted center in the league right now. That's the possibility right now with Michael Porter Jr., is that we haven't seen him in the NBA, or really even in college basketball. The last time we saw this guy was in high school, because he's had so many injuries, and yes, they are back injuries, which are really concerning, but there's all of this potential that at one point it looked like Michael Porter Jr. was the next number one overall pick, the next guy to be like the superstar of a draft class. And that because of the injuries, he fell down to the Nuggets at the end of the lottery. They took a flyer on him because they were able to do so. And now the Nuggets are one of the NBA's best teams. And one of the NBA's best teams usually don't add a young superstar. And that's what Michael Porter Jr. has the capability to be. That look, he even suffered a knee injury that made him miss summer league. So it's not like this guy's completely over these injuries. I mean, he's had 2 back surgeries, and he's like 20 years old. So there is a really strong possibility that he is just too injury prone to last a season in the NBA, especially a season that will most likely include a deep playoff run. But you're telling me that this 6'10" athletically gifted forward, who, he has an outside shot, that you could place him next to Jokic, the best center in the NBA right now, if we're considering Anthony Davis doesn't want to play center right now. Add that in with Gary Harris, Jamal Murray, Paul Millsap, just the deep bench that Denver has. That could be the best team in the league right now. And really, Michael Porter Jr. can set this league on. I know there's a lot of other young guys everyone's looking at. Zion, Ja Morant, all these guys out of this latest draft class. RJ Barrett, that's his name I was thinking of. But Michael Porter Jr. could be the young star to set this league on fire this season. He has that kind of potential. He's shown that. Now, he showed it several years ago in high school, and it's just been injury-riddled since. So we have no idea. But, I mean, if you look at him in some of these preseason games, that shot's looking kind of nice. The way he's able to stretch the floor, looking kind of nice. I mean, a couple days ago, had 11 points, 5 rebounds, 2 blocks, and 1 steal in their preseason victory over Phoenix. That's a nice stat line. And I know he's just going to kind of be in the rotation to start the season out, but if he can prove himself, if he can prove that he can stay healthy and be a contributor, man, watch out. The Denver Nuggets could have the complete X factor this season. But at the end of the day, he's also a 20-year-old who's had 2 back surgeries and a knee injury recently. So the range of possibilities for him is big as well, but that's why he's one of my top questions. And that'll wrap it up for this episode of the Jackson Neill Sports Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Remember, make sure to subscribe and rate this podcast on your favorite platforms. New episodes every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm back at it this week after losing my voice due to illness last week. Now, if you want more episodes of this podcast, as well as my interview series, Anything Goes with Jackson Neill, my music discussion podcast, which is getting relaunched this Sunday, head over to jacksonneillpodcast.com. Link to that into the show notes. That's the go-to spot for everything that I publish. Now, if you're a really big fan of the show, maybe consider becoming a subscriber on Patreon. There, for just a couple dollars a month or even $1 a month, you can get access to cool bonus content, bonus segments each month from this sports podcast right here, as well as my music podcast, as well as bonus content from my interviews on Anything Goes, where I just ask them random questions, and sometimes it's kind of better than the normal interview. So if you want to check that out, that's over on Patreon. Link to that in the show notes. I write, record, produce, do everything for these episodes myself as a full-time college student, so any little bit of support just allows me to spend more time making these episodes. Now, if you want to stay up to date on everything I'm doing, you can follow me on Instagram and Twitter at JacksonNeill20. Today's music is by Analog by Nature with their song CDK Sunday. Thanks again for listening. I'll see you all next time.